Shalom, shalom, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Pulse of Israel. And today I am here with Jeremy Saltan, who also a friend, but someone who I'm introducing in a new way this time, instead of just as a political consultant or as what's your other title in the Yemina party, Jeremy?
I am the Director of English Operations.
The Director of English Operations for the Yemina party, a right-wing party in the Israeli parliament. I'm also introducing him today as a very potential new Chaver Knesset, MK, according to the latest polls that just came out yesterday. One of the polls gives the Yemina party 23 seats, as opposed to Likud, that is down from 49 to 26 seats. Very, very close. And I would love to hear Jeremy's insight into what is going on politically and the implications of these latest polls. If I'm not mistaken, today Yemina is only 6 seats, correct?
No, actually, today Yemina is only 5 seats.
Only 5 seats.
Rav Peretz left Yemina and is now part of the Likud faction. The Beit Yehudi is still a separate party, but Beit Yehudi is part of the Likud faction. So Yemina today is only 5 seats in the current Knesset.
Right. So from 5 seats to a poll giving it 23 seats. And again, we're just talking about polls. This isn't real election results, but in all election cycles, polls provide a very strong psychological impact. And it's used in terms of strategy, like you know better than all of us. So what are the implications of these latest polls, Jeremy?
Well, there's a few things here. You can't look at anything in vacuum. You have to first start with what's happening with the Likud. As everyone knows, Likud is the largest party in the current Knesset. The 36 seats that the Likud was able to win in the last election is the most seats that Benjamin Netanyahu has won out of any election. He's been at the head of Likud in 96, 99, again in 2006, 09, 13, 15, and then the 3 elections of the last year and a half, 2 years. And this is the best showing he ever got with 36 seats. So when you're seeing him down at 26 seats, you have to first look at the fact that that is losing a full 10 seats, double digits from what he has. But as you also mentioned, after the election, we saw a trend in which Likud went even higher than the 36 seats that they had, and for a little while was very comfortably in the 40s. So what is exactly happening with Likud that is both had that little spike that we saw after the election, and now this really gradual drop? Everyone's talking about the current poll, which again has them at 26, but we've already seen quite a few polls having them at 28, 29. Obviously, 26 is within the margin of error of those results, but 26 is also now within the margin of error of a potential 22 or 23 seats. So a lot of the factors that go into that is obviously what it is that all Israeli citizens are living through. Netanyahu loves to talk about the Abraham Accords, of course, and the historic deals with the UAE and Bahrain. He likes to talk about our diplomatic standing around the globe. He likes to talk about the various aspects of our research and development, which hopefully will put us in a very good spot in terms of being able to combat the coronavirus and come up with some sort of vaccine. However, if you look around the streets of Israel, for the most part, they are empty. And that is because we are in a second lockdown. And the majority of people, if you go ahead and you ask follow-up questions, and you can also see in the follow-up questions that were asked in the Channel 12 poll that we're discussing right now. And by the way, you also saw a similar poll with direct polls released also last night, that a majority of Israelis are not happy with the policy of the government. And they don't necessarily understand why it is that we are in a second lockdown. They don't necessarily understand why the rules that are in place are there. It's very hard for people to be able to really just keep updated in terms of how things change every day. Yesterday, someone called me and told me that he's worried because, and this happens sometimes in government, they are doing an amendment to the rules in terms of weddings. So they took from the health ministry, they took off the restrictions and also what's allowed to be done in terms of a wedding, and they left only a very small part, which includes the fact that a groom cannot show up to his own wedding. Now, obviously, that's not true, but that's what it says right now, and then that's what you're expecting the policeman on the street to enforce, stopping a groom from his wedding. Again, not in terms of fines, like physically stopping him from showing up. So you just have a lot of these lacunas. And as the public goes out for its essential needs, whether it's to the grocery store or to the pharmacy or whatever it is, and they start encountering policemen and roadblocks and other government officials or people who want to go ahead and pray and see restrictions changing from day to day. And again, there's no real coherent picture in which you understand that if you meet certain numbers, then certain things will come back up. It's just sort of up in the air. And this is something we saw for a long time during this gradual drop for Likud, when, for instance, earlier before the shutdown, our gym's going to be open, our gym's going to be closed, our hotel's going to be open, our hotel's going to be closed. And what it seemed to be, and the overall feeling, again, if you're looking at the additional questions, not just looking at the seats, which sort of give you a picture of why people are leaving the Likud, and that is that they felt that whoever lobbied or screamed the loudest, they would be the ones that got something, as opposed to people who are less organized, and then they were not able to get their sector or their field to actually be able to continue functioning during the gap between the first and the second wave. So that's sort of why Likud has dropped. It's as a result of the health numbers putting us in a very tough spot. We're right now, if you look at the amount of positive cases per capita per million citizens, we're at over 25,000. That's fifth around the globe, and the four countries above us are, of course, of smaller populations. And then beyond that aspect, you also have a situation of the economy that's not necessarily doing well as you would expect during a shutdown. So that's sort of why Likud is going down. Why is it that we have a situation where Yemina is the one going up? Because usually what has been expected and what we've seen throughout the political history is that you have a right-wing party and you have a left-wing party. And you don't usually have a situation, it's very rare, that the two largest parties are both right-wing. What has happened to
That's
the
never
center?
happened before.
What has happened to the left? So again, you've had a few times, if you want to go back very early, there were times where, especially if you're looking around the peace deal with Egypt, with Gula Cohen and the beginning movement of Tchia and whatever, you've had a few times where it might have looked a little bit differently, but nothing in a situation that's very, very, I'll put it this way, when it comes to recent history, we haven't seen these type of examples. We had a few in which for maybe a month or a few weeks, you would have Bennett in second place, but not by much. We should say this, 23 seats. This is a man who entered politics in 2012. He's never been this high in the polls before. And yes, in terms of situations in which we did have two large right-wing parties, we didn't have a situation where there were two right-wing parties over 20 seats. It was because of the splintering of the center-left that you ended up in this situation in terms of one of those results back in the 70s and the 80s. So again, how does this happen? And by the way, if you look at the breakdown of the poll, you see that in terms of the center-left, and their voters, 8% are supporting Netanyahu for prime minister and 8% are supporting Bennett. That means that you're looking at an equal slice of the pie of the center left that have currently left the center left parties and are supporting both of those individuals and their parties. So it's not that there's one party getting more or another. What you have here is a situation where the center left is now split between Lapid's party, Yesh Atid, Gantz's party, Blue and White. You have, because of friction between both of those parties, of course, they used to be the same party, they split apart. You have Ofer Shelach, number 2 in Yesh Atid, which is having talks with people from Labor and from Meretz. You have people in Meretz also having talks with the joint list. you just have a situation where we're looking towards what will most probably be a realignment of whatever is the center-left Arab bloc before the next election. And there are a lot of voters that are either frustrated or trying to put pressure on their parties and are just perhaps temporarily, but also quite possibly just sick of the leaders that they have in those parties. And they're willing to either go to Bennett or Netanyahu, depending on whichever personality speaks more to them. Again, talking about the fact that 16% of center-left voters are now willing to vote for the two right-wing parties is something that I feel at least is significant. But going back to why it is that Yemina is going up, a lot of the Likud, again, we talk about the 10 seats the Likud lost from the election till now. For Yemina to get up from 5 to 23, that would only get you up to 15. That's not sufficient enough to be able to bring you to where it is that you used to be. Now people forget about this, but before the current stalemate that we've had the last 2 years politically here in Israel, the right-wing bloc used to be around 70 seats, 67 seats, a minimum of about 65 seats if we're going back for a majority of the last decade plus. Pretty much since the Second Lebanese War and Olmert's terrible handling of that war, we've seen for the most part for the last 14 years a situation where the right has had a majority in terms of the blocs until recently with a lot of the personality issues that certain people on the right, and a lot of people call this the soft right, if you will, that used to vote, let's say, Kahlon or right-wing voters that voted for Lapid before they found out that he was more of a leftist and so on and so forth, where a lot of these voters voted blue and white in the last few elections, but now after seeing Gantz in government and seeing the split with Lapid and seeing that there is no alternative to Netanyahu on the left, you have these voters, a lot of them, people call them, anti-Bibi voters, that are flocking to Bennett because they see Bennett as the only alternative to prime minister at the current time. If you look at, again, the suitability for prime minister, when you're looking at Lapid, Gantz, whoever it is that they're asking, whether they're trying to bring someone from the outside like Eisenkot, who's the former IDF chief of staff, which is the big name they're talking about, all of these names, none of them are able to have a significant dent. None of them are able to match up. Suddenly you have a situation where you see that there is a right-wing figure that is not left, that is very close to Likud in the polls. And as Likud drops and Yemina goes up, it's not just the Likud voters. Like I said, it's only 10 seats that moved from Likud to Yemina, which again is still a significant number, but it's not a lot. Mm-hmm. It's the former voters of Kahlon. It's the former voters of Feiglin. It's the former voters of Lapid. It's the former voters that used to be Likud and moved over to Gantz in the last 3 elections because of concerns that they have with Netanyahu and his leadership and his conduct. So that's sort of how you end up in this situation where you have 2 right-wing parties, where you have a lot of people who, if you're looking within the spectrum, you have a very, very, very big amount of center-right voters that are now voting Yemina that never looked at Bennett as an option in the past. And a lot of them, like I said, didn't look at Netanyahu as an option in the past either. They chose other satellite parties that would end up eventually joining a coalition. A lot of these are former Lieberman voters. Israel Beitenu used to be in double digits for all of our viewers who remember the days in which Lieberman had 15 seats and then 13 and then 12. And of course, now in the recent last year or two, he's down at a situation of between 5 to 8. Now he's right now at 7.
So let me ask you this, because in response to the latest polls, that with these numbers, with Yemina so high, 23, close to Likud, down to 26, Likud has putting out a poll back from a previous election. I don't remember which election, a number of years ago, where the poll said that Likud had 20 and Bennett's Yemina party, or I don't know if it was the Yemina at the time, it was probably Beit Yehudi at the time, was receiving 19. Again, Bennett's party 19 and Likud 20. And the message they're trying to give everyone is, guys, it's just a poll. We've seen polls like this before when Bennett was breathing down the neck of of Netanyahu and Likud, nothing to be worried about. And so my question is, how secure are you or Bennett or the party in these poll numbers where there have been polls in the past that have shown going high?
So I said that we only saw 10 seats going from Likud to Yemina. So in terms of what Likud would be able to get back, that there would be a maximum of 10 seats there. Of course, the trend is going in a different direction. Unlike an election cycle in which, for the most part in Israel, the main election cycle is just 6 weeks. If you look at polls going back already 4 months, this is a clear trend. Yemina was at 5, 6, 7. Then they were at 8, 9, 10. And on the other side, Likud has also been gradually going down. So I would say the biggest change between 2013 polls and the polls we're seeing now in 2020 is, number one, Bennett is higher now than he was in 2012, 2013. Number two, most of the votes that we're seeing going to Yemina, unlike in 2012, 2013, are not coming from Likud. They're coming from other voters within the right-wing bloc. Some of them are former Likud voters from previous elections. But like I said, Netanyahu is at his top here, 36 seats. You can't compare his 36 seats to anything he's had before. So a situation where he would get more than that seems very difficult to imagine. And even if we're looking at the 26 seats that he has now, if he was able to gain back, let's say, 4 or 5 seats, that doesn't stop a situation in which Bennett is able to then go ahead and pull, let's say, a few more seats from Shas or a few more seats from possibly Gantz after Gantz falls under the threshold, which is something that a lot of people expect will happen based on what is expected to be his conduct towards the end of the current term, where we see that he does not become prime minister and he's made a fool of, and then people are going to ask why it is that they could trust this guy again, who is just not able to deliver. Of course, as most people know, he got the seats that he did by saying that he's the alternative to Bibi. Then he broke his party up to enter the coalition in order to end Bibi's term and become the next prime minister. If he both fails to become prime minister and also fails to end Netanyahu's term as prime minister, that goes ahead and tells all of his voters who are still with him, since obviously he lost quite a lot to Lapid after deciding to go into the government, I just don't see him being able to maintain those seats.
So let me add this. I mean, again, you touched upon the fact that the disappointment with this government and Bibi getting the blame, since he is prime minister, in its dealing with the coronavirus for Israeli society. And I just want to add, there are many people who look to Naftali Bennett as a potential leader to help Israel, specifically in that, because he looks like he's proving himself to be extremely proactive in working on solutions, in being connected to the street, and being connected to potential solutions to help the Israeli economy. And there are plenty of people today who are saying, okay, it looks like he can handle it, so let's go in that direction. And then it comes to people like me when I see that this government that was set up as an emergency government, right? You have 2 contenders who are vying to be prime minister, and they set up an emergency government of the 50-50 responsibility of voting, and unheard of type of government, a 50-50, even though Likud has many more seats than blue and white, and its main goal was to take care of Corona, and it's an absolute failure in helping take care of Corona. And we understand that when we had a transfer government, it was much better than this emergency government. Do you really see that in this time period we're going to be potentially going to elections with the fear of Corona and a potential continuing shutdown, or the economy so bad? Is that really the right thing to do?
So I think the problem is that the government we have is not the government that the people of Israel chose, right? You just said it yourself. This is a 50-50 government between right and left. The people who voted for Netanyahu, they wanted a right-wing government. They did not get any right-wing government here. They were promised two main things. One was to apply sovereignty, and the second one was to combat the coronavirus. Instead, this government decided to combat sovereignty and effectively kill it. And they decided to apply the coronavirus with policies that I think at least now a majority of people, including many ministers, even within Likud, admit were irresponsible, such as allowing 250 people at events within 2 weeks of lifting the restrictions straight away. So I think that a lot of people are looking at the fact that they do not have trust in the current system, the current government, the current people that are making decisions. And they look back at the first wave and they look at the decision making that Naftali Bennett had as defense minister, and they see that almost every policy that he pushed for ended up being very effective. The corona hotels, to go ahead and take the people who have corona and remove them, because let's put it this way, they don't have this on the list, but the number one thing that makes people get corona is a family member in their house who gives it to them. You know, everyone cares about how that person got corona, but in the end, the majority of people get it from their family member. Removing people and putting them in the corona hotels was something that was very effective. Gantz decided to shut them down. Bibi didn't override that. I can't blame Bibi completely. But again, you see someone taking initiatives such as Bennett, and then you see Gantz saying, I don't think that makes sense. There are a number of other things that you can do looking at that. The Weizmann Institute was making great gains. The Nes Ziona branch, which deals with money coming in from the defense ministry, that was something that Bennett spent a lot of time at. Gantz, again, decided to move away from that for whatever reason. Bennett was pushing for more tests so that we could be able to test people and prevent a second wave. Gantz said there was no reason to go ahead and do that. And again, Netanyahu is the one who decided to form this government and give Gantz the chance of being prime minister next, and to also give him defense minister, and to give him a lot of power when it came to coronavirus. We see now that Netanyahu has taken a lot of the reins in and removed a lot of the responsibilities with Gantz. But Gantz made a lot of big errors, and I think that's another reason why he's losing a lot of support at the moment. So,
yeah,
you know, when voters are looking at do they want an election or not want an election, they're saying, I feel right now that there is no plan and that the people who are leading us are making bad decisions. And here's a guy who had good ideas, such as, when you had the situation in Bnei Brak and Tira and other cities that were isolated as opposed to just the entire country. Like there's just someone who has a shadow cabinet, who's taken experts, is putting out good ideas.
Referring to Bennett, for those who are not familiar.
Yes, to Bennett. And as opposed to that, you have an actual government that is just not giving information and is not making very much sense in terms of what the objectives are, when we can expect to see different changes of policy, as well as not giving a little bit of time in between before seeing implementation. And a lot of it, like I said, is sloppy, such as the work we're seeing from the health ministry website. You know, I just gave one example earlier on. So I think a lot of voters are saying we don't want to go to an election, but on the other side, we want to know that the person that is leading us through this is someone who's going to make sure I still have a job when the lockdown is over. They want to know that the state budget is not going to be completely bankrupt. They want to know that it's safe and that we'll have a healthy country and that we can go out on the streets again. When Netanyahu goes ahead and tells everybody, listen, we're going to get out after Simchas Torah, and then afterwards we start to hear him this week and say, actually, you're not getting out. And then he says there's going to be a vote on lifting restrictions, and then he pushes off that vote. There's just a sense of chaos, of it not being run well. And what he keeps referring to are PowerPoint presentations. When Naftali Bennett is in the field, on the ground, speaking to actual people and trying to see what the deal is, as opposed to just looking at PowerPoints all day and trying to make decisions based on raw numbers. These are people's lives. This is not, you're talking about it doesn't make sense rationally to go to an election. People are impulsive, they're emotional, they're very, very frustrated. You have a lot of indirect issues with this lockdown. You have a rise in domestic abuse, you have depression, suicides are up. A lot of these things aren't being published because I understand you don't want to give motivation for a lot of these things, but they're, the numbers are there. They've been, published to the Knesset members. There are a lot of very, very big problems. To go ahead and lower the corona numbers in terms of the deaths is a great thing. But if you're going to raise the overall amount of deaths in the country and despair and crash our economy in the process, so again, you're not looking at the big picture. You're just looking at a very, very small micro issue.
Yeah. So my own personal take on this, as I started to say, for a while already, I've said if the main goal of this government was set up to take care and deal with corona, and it is an absolute failure because it's too much politics. This 50-50 government, it can't work. There's too much. Every decision is political, whether we like it or not. There's infighting between the different parties, and it's crazy. And they're not able to get, this party wants this, the other party wants that. It's a failure. And because it's a failure, I've been promoting, yes, we should have new elections to have a new government with all of the headache and with all of the waste in money. But we need a functioning government to deal with this crisis that we're going through, and that the whole world's going through. And it's now I'm going to get more political with you, going more to your political insight in terms of thinking, okay, so when is Netanyahu going? When is the right time for that Netanyahu will decide to go to new elections? And I've heard two different frames of thought, and I'd love to hear your input. On the one hand, I think Amit Segal is the one journalist, political pundit out there saying, listen, the higher the seats that Yemina has, the closer they are to Likud. Netanyahu is going to push off elections as far as possible because it endangers his potentially continued winning if he goes to election soon, and he's going to try to wait till Likud goes up in the polls. On the other hand, I've heard people say, no. These are just polls. And just like the poll I said earlier, that from 2012, 2013, it's just polls. But what Bennett's good for is he's bringing all of these 10 seats or whatever seats that you're talking about from the center left to the right wing. So right now they're in a poll for Bennett, but Netanyahu's going to go to the elections and Likud will get some of them back. So we're going to have elections soon. Where's your take on those two different perspectives on when Netanyahu will decide, all right, we have to go to elections to get a functioning government?
I'm a procedure guy, right? That's I always like to look at. You have to look at the political calendar. All these things are true, but you have to look at it from a much more technical picture. We have the vote in December for the budget. I don't see anything happening before December. I've told a lot of people, I have friends across the political spectrum, all these people going to demonstrations. Netanyahu doesn't care about demonstrations. We saw that when 500,000 people went out for cottage cheese. You're doing nothing about it. Netanyahu pretends that he cares about it just so that they focus on that instead of somewhere else. Netanyahu is very good at making sure that the focus is on what's good for him. Everyone thought the focus on investigations was bad for him. We saw he went up in the polls and got more seats as a result. He's, of course, on trial now, and his base doesn't seem to care. This is something that was unfathomable for his opponents. So you have to look at the calendar. December is this big vote. Anything that happens before December does not matter because there's no deadline. And when there's no deadline, there's no reason for a politician to make any decision. Only people who are very inexperienced, like Asaf Zamir, who resigned now, or Miki Khaimovich, all these people have absolutely no political experience. They're going ahead and taking some, novice moves here. But when it comes to, the big boys, if you will, you're not going to see a movement before December. In December, if Netanyahu or Gantz, both, and it can be, one or the other, if any of them see an incentive in going to an election based on the numbers in December, they will crash the government in December and we will have an election in March. If one of them decides that they want to go ahead and crash the government will be crashed. It's enough one of them. You don't need both of them to agree. The reason elections were averted in August was that Bennett was already very high in the polls. At that time in August, he was at 19 seats. Maybe Netanyahu prefers, maybe he tells himself, no, he should have gone to an election in August when Bennett was at 19, as opposed to now where he's 23. Again, we're talking about, August was, just a month ago. It wasn't a long time ago. So you have a situation where Gantz is afraid of his own political survival. If both of them agree, like they did in August, that it makes sense, they're going to delay it till March. Why March? I'm not going to get into all the technicalities of how you do this with budgets, but basically either you can pass on the 2020 budget and eliminate it, or you can agree to pass a biannual budget in which the vote will be in the deadline of 2021. According to the current law, if the 2021 budget is not passed by March 31st, 2021, it triggers an immediate election automatically on the Tuesday within closest to the 90 days from that date. So it makes a lot of sense if both of them see that the polls are the way that they are now, that they will push off whatever happens in December to the deadline in March. However, in March, I do expect if the government doesn't fall in December, that the government will fall in March. Why is the government going to fall in March? Because we're approaching the time in which Benny Gantz is supposed to become prime minister. And Netanyahu's entire plan has been to prevent Benny Gantz from being prime minister. I've been on the Post many times, and I keep coming back to that. Netanyahu talked about, going off to the sunset. He doesn't plan on doing that. He plans on having an election before Benny Gantz has an opportunity to become prime minister. His last real opportunity to do that is to crash the government at the end of March. He has a built-in deadline. He doesn't need to vote for it. He doesn't need to do anything. And then we'll have elections in June, at the end of June. And right now, I think if you're looking at the way the polls are, trend, it's very likely that that's where we're headed. I don't know, though, if we see a lockdown that continues till Hanukkah, as some of the talk is that we're seeing based on various leaks. And I can't imagine in the middle of the winter that things are going to be better. You could start to see certain things getting a little bit more interesting in terms of the pressures in December. But right now, I think it makes more sense politically, based on the current parameters at hand, that the government falls in March and we have an election in June. And that will allow Netanyahu, if he's able to, or perhaps Bennett or someone else, to be able to form a government before Gantz's term was even supposed to start. There's, of course, the conspiracy theory that after the elections are called for in March, that Netanyahu will put himself forth as a candidate for president, because as president, he can pardon himself. So also, if you believe that conspiracy theory, which I do not believe.
I don't buy it.
Again, I call it a conspiracy theory because I don't believe it to be valid. But I'm saying even for those who believe in that, there's no interest in crashing it in December, because he would want to go into 2021 so that he would be able to put himself forth on a candidate before the election, as opposed to having to go through an election as a prime minister candidate.
Interesting. Jeremy, always a pleasure hearing your insights, procedural and all-encompassing. Thank you very, very much.
Of course. Thank you. Have a great day, Avi, and thanks to everyone who watched.
Moadim l'simcha. Stay safe and stay healthy. And to all you listeners out there, again, signing off from the eternal and ancestral homeland of the Jewish people for another episode of the Pulse of Israel. Thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed the fabulous insight that Jeremy provided us. Take care, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy. You as well.
Pulse of Israel, frontline videos from the Holy Land. Support our